Okay, so Geo is doing some Geo thing this week. Some did Kane did I'd have to look at his text. Some volunteer training for some very selfless thing he's involved in. So
Mhm.
he tapped Kane, who you know. And I know Kane very well. Greg, I don't think you and I have met. I missed Immersive Toronto. I missed Juicy, all the Juicies recently. So yeah, it's great to meet you.
It's great to meet you too. Not had the pleasure, but I will be in Denver, so I'm assuming you'll be in Denver.
I will not miss Denver for sure. Kane,
Okay.
Denver.
Denver's gonna be awesome.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Dueling
No, I
pianos.
can't.
Remember dueling pianos when we were in Denver last time?
Yeah,
It's awesome.
super fun. Yeah, it'll be
Yeah.
super fun. And
No, it's great. It's
then
like your hometown.
oh yeah, I mean, yeah.
I've actually got my old college friends who some of them I've not seen for, but I don't know, 12, 15 years, whatever it may be, who have said they'll fly in, and a couple of them in Colorado still, but so the weekend before,
Nice.
flying, which is quite nice. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. I love it. Okay, I already hit record. Greg text messaged and said, I have not seen any prep questions. And I was like, yep, that's what we do. We're uncensored. We do not
That's
prep.
right. You're a
Greg, if
prep.
you're ever on my podcast, we prep over there. Geo does not prep, which I totally embrace. But I was like, Kane, I don't know anything about Greg. You're going to have to maybe drive a little bit. Okay, so you are the chief commercial officer at Clockwise. And Kane's been to Clockwise locations before, so he has more context. And you've been at Dasana. You have a weirdly long track record in the industry. Like, kind of, sometimes you get people who are like, yeah, this is what I do. I still think all the time, should I be doing this? Like, you know, can we really do this as a career, like forever?
Yeah.
So you've been like since 2014. You were at Instant for a while. I mean, the UK is the place to make it a career for sure, but you've been doing this for a while. Because 2014 was kind of when WeWork was getting its momentum here. Was an operator starting in 2012, and that was like early days here. So you're pretty early days.
Yeah, I would say so. I think,
Yeah.
I still remember it was before Regis, their first big acquisition of their major competitor in the UK, which was MWB. I
Okay.
remember a time before that, and then there was Avanta and a few other way before
Hmm.
Space. So
Yep.
yeah, I definitely look back and I go, yeah, I mean, I've just time flies like that, and for someone who kind of, as I'm finding out, most people actually just landed in this industry, didn't
Totally.
necessarily have a
Yes.
part. It was like,
No, it's very unusual that somebody's got this history. So I was like, wow, this will be very, very interesting. And also, I don't know any other brands. I'm stuck. Is the chief commercial officer title common in the UK? I don't see that here. Kane, you don't have a chief commercial officer, do you?
no,
No.
no. I'm
Maybe
not
an
there.
equivalent, but
Yeah, explain what that is.
yeah,
Yeah,
y-
commercial
y-
officer. You might have a CRO, chief revenue officer, chief
yep,
commercial officer,
kind of the
effectively.
same. Okay.
Yeah, it's similar, basically overseeing revenue line. So whether that's sales, marketing, ancillary products, expansion, so kind of all of those parts of the business roll into me. Recently just hired a new director of sales, which we've not put a press release out on yet, but he's changed his LinkedIn, so it's kind of out the bag. But we've got really great guys come over from WeWork, who I worked with for a long, long time. So yeah, so that's the title, Chief Revenue Officer. There may be other terms for it across the US. I don't know, but maybe that's the one.
Okay. Love it. Tell us about the Clockwise portfolio. And Kane, you can add some color because you've visited.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, okay. We'll get your uncensored opinion, and I'll kind of give you. So I had to get it in there. Well, Clockwise's portfolio, it's an interesting one. So it's 18 assets across 17 different cities. Brussels is the only place we have more than one. So unlike most providers, we are really distributed. So you typically have people who kind of cluster down, or you have geographic spread, but again, they've got a number in each, but we do not, which has been interesting and adds tons of complexity, but it is great in many ways. But the portfolio again is interesting because Clockwise was started and is owned by Castleforge Partners, who actually own 17 of the assets that Clockwise operate in. So in some respects, Clockwise is kind of this owner operator in partnership with their the parent company, I guess. And we have one location that is on a kind of a hybrid or management agreement, whatever you want to call them, in Brussels with Patrizia, who are a pretty big landlord over there in Europe. So that is the kind of composition of our portfolio. We're in the UK and Europe. So in most of the major UK cities, We're not in London, which is a question I always get. Oh, what about London? And then we're in Bremen in Germany, The Hague in the Netherlands, Brussels, as I've said, we have two, and we're also in Antwerp. So that's the kind of spread. So often people will look and go, wow, okay, there's a lot of, and then we're in Edinburgh, and we're in Glasgow, and we're Belfast, and we're in, Liverpool and Manchester. I think Manchester is kind of the most, I guess, saturated flex market that we're in. But it's interesting because we're in everywhere from Manchester, which operates quite like a London in many respects. It's super saturated, loads of competition there, through to places like Bremen, where we're one of very few, and so we've got a couple of Regis sites over there and a couple of independent players. But you're not so much competing to gain share of flex market as much as you are trying to kind of educate on all the things that flex solves for and starting that journey again. So yeah, and everything in between. So we have a really interesting kind of spread in terms of our portfolio and how we activate each market because of the dynamics, I guess, which is, makes it a fun job, I guess.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you have like dots on a map, like a lot of and they're spread out, right? That is, I saw that when I was looking at the portfolio, and that was one of the things that I thought was really interesting. Is that predicated on where the assets are of the ownership group? Is that why that's why it's spread out the way it is?
Yeah, for sure. It was kind of, I guess, other way around. So kind of an asset-led strategy to buy into regional assets at good times, which done very extremely well. And then Clockwise has been able to go in and be additive to the asset, right? So less so kind of, I guess, a Clockwise first strategy, which hopefully is something that we're going to be working towards in tandem in the future.
Yeah, and then when you look at going into one of the assets, or what percentages are you usually? You're usually not the whole asset, right? Like you're just a portion of the asset, or is there a lot of cases where you're the full asset?
There's a lot of cases with the full asset. Yeah. And like all things, didn't start that way, but we've got a really high, I would say, performing portfolio in terms of the occupancies and the rates we're achieving relative to market. So, and I think a number of reasons, not one in particular, but I think product, team, people, and all the rest of it. So yeah, in many cases started with some and added, and then others just kind of from the get-go thought it would be your best use for Clockwise. So yeah, I would say we're a good majority in many of the assets that we're in.
What's the typical size of a location?
So for us, again, varies in terms of the entire asset, but from a Clockwise holding perspective, we kind of hover around, which is the classic, 30,000 square foot or so, 30, 40,000 square foot up to 50. So that's the kind of range. And again, we're currently looking at expanding further into our existing kind of assets because we have opportunities to do so. So that will grow. But yeah, I think most operators kind of talk about that, 30 to 50 range in the most part. I think especially if you're for a flex operation in a single market, I think there's kind of a minimum viable, size of square foot and desks you need to be programming to make the numbers work, right? With just running the operation, especially when you have, kind of no efficiencies to be gained from clustering. So, yeah.
Yep. And staff and that kind of thing. Okay, I think I'll take responsibility for an internet glitch. When you talked about your structure, you're owned by an asset group. Is that can you just repeat that for the listener and for me?
Sure. We're owned by Castleforge Partners, which is a private equity real estate firm.
Okay. But they own physical assets and they own the OpCo, which is
correct.
Clockwise. So they place you into assets where it makes sense. And that's why you're sort of distributed, because you are not leasing and sort of intentionally clustering in a market, more opportunistic and let's make this work. But you have a bigger footprint, which gives you the economies of scale that you need in a particular market. Okay.
Yeah. I think it's a great relationship as well, because I think very few are owner operator, and I guess we're quasi owner operator in that way. But the ability to kind of ebb and flow with market demand is really interesting, because you can think about the asset as a whole, and we work really, really closely with Castleforge as well to think about what makes sense at any given time. We have plenty of people who graduate up the stack as well, so they've had a great time with us. At Clockwise, we actually don't program large enterprise suites. We've always kind of really focused on the smaller end of the market, which actually is really beneficial as markets become more, I guess, more institutional or flex. Because I think in London, as an example, it's quite interesting. Lots of the providers who had these big suites on the flex side are kind of starting to have their quote unquote lunch eaten by landlords who are self-delivering managed suites or managed workspace providers, and that's creating some challenge there because they can deliver them as, slightly lighter on the service because companies of that size are kind of more concerned with the easy and easy out. So we focused on that kind of smaller end of the market, average unit size of say 6 to 8, and then aiming not to do, and we do have customers above this, but aiming really not to have things above the 20, 30 mark to retain very little concentration, revenue concentration, which is the thing to do. And again, in that asset, we've got the ability to offer people to move up within the asset, either on a lease or what we call powered by. So they can have a lease with Castle Forge, and they can have the services and the access to Clockwise to kind of power that solution for them. So it's kind of that in between. So many benefits, but that being one of them, being able to actually help a customer grow throughout the life cycle.
So when you say small end of the market, you're not talking about like micro. I mean, in the US, we'll see operators who are heavy on like 1, 2 person, 3 person offices. Do you go that small or because you mentioned the 6 to 8 person, is that kind of a median size?
Yeah, we do. It's I guess the 6 to 8 is probably the average size. I think, it really depends on the asset, honestly, and the market demand.
Yep.
So yeah, we have our kind of brand standards and the way we think about distribution of kind of those sizes of units. But again, we always take a local market approach because, well, we've been forced to, right? We're in so many different markets. There's not the cookie cutter. You don't have that. So we definitely do the smaller suites, absolutely. And it just depends on, how many of those we're delivering based on what the market demand tells us. We also learn a lot from what we already have in place. So if we're expanding into new floors within our existing asset, we already kind of know compositionally how it should be made up. So just really depends, honestly. The ones and twos kind of typically like gold dust. So they go very quickly. And I don't know, most operators always kind of maybe wish they had more of those in place after the fact. But yeah, we have everything in between.
Kane?
Yeah, I think it's so interesting how when you look at European operators and out of the UK, it's just there's so many different ownership structures, there's so many different product types, and I find it so interesting. And when you look at London, there's a lot of owner operators, quite a few owner operators anyway, right? That own the real estate, and which is very interesting because like in Canada, I would say United States to a large extent as well, real estate is driven by financing, and financing, like lenders just have no idea how to finance this stuff. So they're like, they can figure out hotels and self-storage, but for some reason they can't figure out co-working, right? So it's interesting. And so when you look at going into those markets, like when you were talking about all those little markets, the first thing that was going to my mind is like, how do you go into these little markets that you're not in at all, and all of a sudden dig into a customer base, like go from unknown to known, right? And then, and then fill up those spaces. Because you're saying like in some markets, there's a lot of competition, right? And in other markets, you're pretty much the only game in town. And like, those are two very different sales strategies in terms of like how to get your customers, those sort of things. And you're like, as an operator who's leasing, or I guess even doing management deals, you can be very selective on where you're going to go and what you're going to do. When you're buying the asset, right? Because there can be different motivations. You could say, this could be an asset that's in a gentrifying area that's like, I know in 5 years, this thing is going to be like, this thing is going to be roof. But the thing is, how do you lease that up on a co-working basis between now and that 5-year horizon, right? And so I think it's really interesting. I'd love to hear about, because you're basically like chief commercial officer, like chief revenue officer. I'd love to hear your strategies when you're like, hey, guess what? We just opened up this 30,000 square foot location in this market that you've never heard of. How about go and fill it up? What's that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess, I joined in August. So, all the assets were in place. So it was kind of a land and say, here's the portfolio, here's where we're at the moment. Let's go and diagnose where we're at and where we'd like to be. And we had some top performers and we had some performers that were kind of not quite there for a number of reasons. And yeah, I think the honest answer is you have to go and you have to dig into like what's driving the market. So I think understanding that, I think the brokers and agents and real estate agents are always like great source of intel to just help you understand like what's happening in the market. Not all of them will have great graphs on flex, for example, because I don't know, depending on the market, some are trading in flex and some are not. But they can give you good indicators as to like how you'll be successful in the market. If they may be able to tell you things like, oh, there's a real undersupply of this, this kind of size of space, or landlords are starting to think about cutting up suites and offering them in this way, and you can kind of then understand what you're competing with. the game there is then to convince them that you're a great solution and we should be in front of them clients and all the rest of it. The second is, I think the obvious one is like trying to understand what if you're looking at online. So obviously like digital is a big driver in the main, but not all markets can rely on digital because search volumes might be low, right? Like if no one's searching for flexible workspace X, then you're trying to capture a percentage of a very small thing. So it's about understanding how much of it you could reasonably capture through there. And if you're one of not many in a market with low search volumes, you still may be able to say, well, actually, if our ambition is to capture still a significant proportion, how do we invest? What channels do we activate? Do we look at obviously not just paid search? You're looking at out of home, for example. Do you need to deploy out of homes? There's a few areas where we deployed out of home because we need to have in-market presence, like on the ground presence. Like physical collateral is important in some markets. Paid social works really well in some markets. So I think you have to go and understand the dynamics of the market, who's there. And then I think it's, okay, how do you position yourselves and via what channels? And honestly, it's just so different for us anyway, whether you're in Bremen or you're in Manchester. So Manchester's a very broker-heavy market. There's lots of flex concentration. So obviously brokers focus their efforts on doing more flex deals there. So they hold a lot more of the market. There's still a high search volume there as well, but that's a relatively, in many ways, it's an easy strategy because there's search volume, there's people searching, that people know about flex. It's about making sure you've got good broker relationships. They understand your points of difference. They understand what you have available at any given time, and you're able to justify your price point. I think that's the other thing as well. I think we pitch ourselves at the more premium end because we deliver great looking spaces, but we really focus on service. We genuinely do focus on how do we give people a great experience when they come to the building. Now, granted, everyone says that, so that maybe is not the first time people have heard this, but we genuinely do. And we think really critically about like what are the things we're doing in those spaces based on the member base. So yeah, it's a multitude of different things. Member referrals, the other one. So like upsizes. I think we've got a certain building where one of the main drivers of new deal creation is member upsizing, because we're in a market where if they like it and they stay, they tend to grow, and there's a real journey they go on, and because it's a more local market, they refer other people that they know. So it's just knowing which levers that you have to pull on, and kind of there's a bit of, Kane, honestly, there's a bit of trial and error. Like that's the only way to do it, the honest answer. So yeah, maybe that's not kind of there's no kind of silver bullet. It's just a combination of different things, but just knowing it, working with, I guess, is the first fundamental.
Yeah, it's just to understand the local market, and then like whatever's going to be effective in that market, and trying out different strategies and figure out what sticks, and then basically, do you have a different playbook? Like you're going to be like, in Brussels, I'm going to do this, and in Manchester, I'm going to do that, right? Like like I'm heavy in social in this market, I'm heavy in search in this market, I'm heavy in broker in that market. Like that must be interesting for your marketing team.
It is, and we do, and yeah, exactly, yeah, no, it's a lot. We've got to a place now where we've got enough data using our CRM correctly and all the rest of it, and having kind of the right naming conventions and all those kind of things, getting that stuff in order to understand what's contributing what. So by channel, by size of office, and all the rest of it. So we've got a pretty clear picture now on if there's an office size in a certain market, we kind of know where it's going to come from, and therefore what we need to deploy. It's been a process to get there, but yeah, every quarter, which we've just got done doing, we look ahead and we say, well, what is the, we think about things in terms of net gain. So the concept of not, desk sales or, as a driver, but how many net positive people do we want in our buildings by the end of this quarter, and work backwards from there. What does that mean for new sales based on expected churn and based on where those leads are going to be coming from? And then we are able to apply hopefully some science. It's not an exact science, but some science to, okay, what are our lead targets by channel, really in three main buckets: direct through our kind of marketing channels and direct channels, broker led, and site led. And we look at site led in two ways: new and existing. So new is like prospecting, big part of local community groups, and the other is kind of activating your existing member base, whether that be referrals or upsizes. One thing I would say that we've really indexed on, and we've had to, is like our general managers of our buildings being really involved in the local community. Like that's paid huge dividends. I think sometimes overlooked, honestly, but that has definitely been massive for us in terms of kind of being more visible in the local community and driving your business, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, what does that look like for you? Because I think overlooked and also just really challenging, because you budget for on-site staff, right? And then and they're typically sort of different than your marketing team. So how do you activate them? Like, how do you, like, from a practical perspective, how do you give them the opportunity to go out into the community?
Yeah, so it's a great question. It's a question that we've kind of been thinking about. How do we give people more bandwidth to go and do those things, right? Because as you know, if you're a general manager in a building whose job is to look after the building, run the team there, look after the community there, and you're running point on sales, your ability to do anything like external is like really diminished, really tough. So, and at the same time, you don't have a separate salesperson per building, right? Especially if you're not clustering. So, kind of on this journey, we've kind of gone through a kind of a structuring of things to create this kind of new, I guess, new sales function across multiple assets. In a way in which doesn't cause someone kind of crazy mileage to cover. So we've kind of clustered, and we've taken away a lot of the not the sales responsibility, I would say, because the sales responsibility is the responsibility of the whole team. But for managing pipeline, for following up, for doing all the things that a salesperson would do, we've kind of removed that away. We've created a lot of automations to remove a lot of the manual tasks that these teams were having, on-site teams were having to do, things like finance tasks and things like that have been taking up a lot of time. So we tried to remove as much as we can from our site teams to be able to deliver experience and manage the member base. And that's the only way to do it, as far as I can see. I mean, maybe someone's got a better idea, but I think, removing things from their plate. And actually, you don't just do that. By doing that, you actually place things in the hands of folks who've got different specialisms, because running a site and running a community is very different from running a sales pipeline. Like,
Yep.
it just is. It's different people. So I think, that's a shift we're making, but we're very, very, very keen on not taking away that, that kind of ethos of, you don't want to be sold to by someone who's faceless, is never at the building, doesn't know kind of who you
Yep.
are. Like they do the sale, they chuck you over the fence, and then you never see them again, and it's the community jobs to pick up. We've set up the structure so that is not what happens, and we maintain that kind of like that you're the face that people see. So yeah, it's a long-winded answer of saying just taking things away, moving stuff around, and giving them space to do that, honestly.
Yeah. So when you say, just to clarify, community engagement, you mean within the building, not necessarily like outside.
I mean outside.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So
part of that, removing sort of the repetitive things and the admin tasks around sales, is like they can get away from their desk. Because I mean, in some of the markets you're in, when you talk about education, like some of that is just boots on the ground, right? Like that's one of the levers probably, and you can't underestimate how critical that can be. I know Mara from 25 North Coworking, it's hard to measure. She has said, though, she's like, we see a pipeline difference when we're like going to the chamber events, which may not be 100% equivalent in your markets, but like, right, being out in the community, she's like, it's very hard to measure, but we can tell like when we're not and when we are, and it's meaningful.
yeah, for sure. And we have tagging set up so that if someone has met someone by prospecting that group, we tag that. And so we're very hot on. We use HubSpot. I know anyone
Okay.
use HubSpot. I don't know if I needed to plug them, but we do. But we've kind of got really comfortable with the shape of our HubSpot and our CRM, and making sure that all of our secondary lead sources match up to the primaries, and so that we're really big on data. The other thing that I kind of have us do now is we have this really in-depth month-on-month trends meeting that we have every single month. And we look at every single kind of piece of information that we can that lives within our CRM to understand how it's trending, what's changing, so that we can understand why. Is it something we've done? Is it something we're not aware of? And we need to unpack why that's been done. So by no means are we perfect, but I think we're getting pretty good at really understanding what things are driving other things, or what kind of actions are driving the outcomes. I think some of the stuff around the hardest stuff actually is stuff like out of home. Probably, you have a billboard, you have a sign, you do those kinds of things. Like, you can have QR codes and they can track through and all the rest of it, but like someone could see that come through, forget they saw it, not tell the person, that gets lost. So we've kind of thought about the sources that we would track as a proxy for those things working well. So like, what would you expect to see if you had an out of home campaign go live in and around you? What channels would you expect to see have that uptick? So we've kind of done a bit of work on kind of that as well, to kind of add proxies to help us get sites. So yeah, that's what we've been doing.
That's very interesting. I have a completely different direction question for you. Thinking about the UK and coming over here to North America and seeing the US and Canadian operators, what's your impression of the difference between what you see and because you've been in the industry also and working at Instant, like you have a lot of experience. So I was thinking about, your travels and what you've seen, and I think there's a stark difference, and I'd love to hear it from your perspective.
I was going to ask you what you think your stark difference is, but maybe you don't want to poison the well.
Right, exactly. We compare
What do I
notes.
think? Yeah, no, what I think. I think there's far more depth of market in the US and Canada. I think there's far less concentration, far less penetration. So I think if you just look at a penetration perspective, and I mean, look, London, let's say 12% of the office market now, growing 10 to 12% is flex to trad. In the US, average is kind of around 2-ish, and it ticks up to 5-ish, and in some of the busy markets. So I think there's a huge depth of market in the US that is untapped. I would say that probably in my experience, now this is not to say there are great operators on both sides, but I would say you probably have a bigger number of operators across on the UK side who have a number of different sites, all kind of a large number of sites. That's growing in the US as well. I think it's really difficult, honestly, because again, my time at Dasana, right, we were kind of aggregating the entire market. And you look at that and you go, there are literally hundreds of operators with 20 plus locations, like in the world, right? I was speaking to someone the other day and they're like, I've never heard of this one, that one, that one. You go, yeah, I mean, there's just so many of them. So yeah, I think it's difficult. I think the product has really kind of was originated in the UK in London. If we want to call London the kind of the place where it was kind of most advanced, I would say that the busier markets in Europe have more concentration of more, I guess, players are becoming more institutional, I would say. And I think it's an earlier stage in US and Canada. That would be my sense. But just from a timing perspective, no lack of, ability, talent, or understanding. That would be my take. Maybe that's you disagree with that, or you've seen something different. But
I think that's interesting. That's a great perspective, and I agree. When I went to Coworking Europe in Berlin last year, the amount of operators I bumped into, they're like, "Oh yeah, I have 25. Oh yeah, I have 45 locations." But I'm like, "I've never heard of you. How is that possible?" Right? There's like this whole market outside of North America, it turns out. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting. But I've been asked the question because you look at the UK and you look at London, and you're saying like 10 to 12% versus call it like a 1 to maybe 4.5% sort of thing, North America. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that London has such a large share versus like US? Because when you think about New York, like why would New York not have 10%?
Yeah.
I would love to dig in and understand why that might be. Any thoughts on that?
yeah, no, part of me just thinks timing, like, because I think if you follow it on a thread, if Flex has been around for a longer period of time, more people have had exposure to it as that product's evolved. Therefore, occupiers again, if you look at comparing London to another market that's that is kind of not that busy, you go, well, actually, occupiers have more exposure. Therefore, they take it in greater quantum. Therefore, there needs to be more people to provide that service. And I think it's been dragged down in many respects. I think it's more and more operators have entered because they go, well, occupiers in London really get flex. It's super commonplace. There's room for more opportunity here because there's so much demand for it. And it just has followed that suit. Probably the same as in New York, and there's a realization there as an example, but maybe just kind of playing the catch up. That would be my sense. And maybe, I don't know, maybe you could also say, building architecture, right? Because if you go to New York, like everything's pretty big, deep floor plates. The building composition is really big. So, the opportunity in London, we've got loads of different types of buildings in London. There's lots of smaller stuff and stuff that maybe is easy for people to get their teeth into. Whereas I guess maybe in New York, if you're an operator, you're committing to like a pretty sizable chunk, and you're probably trying to find a floor plate that's not too deep because, internal space is very hard to monetize or underwrite, people to take. So it could be a composition of, a combination of, time in life and just along the evolution curve, in terms of exposure to flex, and maybe the composition of the assets, the way that they are in New York versus London. I don't know if that's right or not, but that would be, you know, a couple of guesses that I would make. I don't know, Ken, have you, or Jamie, have you guys got an opinion?
I heard the same thing. So like what you said is exactly like I heard the composition of the market, smaller floor plates. You know, when you look at a market like New York, even Toronto, like an average floor plate in Toronto is going to run you 25,000 square feet average. You know, we have 100,000 square foot floor plates here. We have 40,000 square foot floor plates. So like, and there isn't, if you look in the concentrated area where people want to be in like a market, and maybe New York's like this too, where you want to be in Toronto is a very tight little quadrant, right? And within that quadrant, there's only so many assets, and most of them are towers, to your point. And whereas, London has all these little nodes that are all connected by great public transit infrastructure, which we also don't have in North America. And then those nodes have all these different sized assets. Like if you want to take down a 10,000 square foot, single building asset, you could probably find one pretty close to a subway station that would be in a market that people would want to be in. Whereas, in the US, I think that's harder. I just think there's less of those sort of concentration of demand in areas where you have a lot of like asset mix.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right.
Yeah.
I'd never thought about the floor plate. Makes a ton of sense, actually.
Because that's an interesting thing with my travels is, unless you have a location that is just the location, it just sells itself, right? Yeah, the market and the location just sells itself. Unless you have that, it's very tough to make it work with bad floor plates. Like it's just that becomes and I've seen some people get it really wrong, and typically it's a combination of things. Either you bet on a location that was not a location. You usually like, we're going to be the first people here. It's going to build a market that didn't happen, or you went into a market and you just thought, well, I can take any old thing here and it's going to be great. And you've got loads of internal space that you can't let, and and then you've taken a building where actually you realize you can't actually change the composition of it, right? So like you go on, I've seen an operator who's one of their spaces, like their average, office size was like a 20, but that butt heads with the traditional office vacancy. So there was a ton of trad at that size, and they were competing directly with trad, and it's really hard to, then you're in a price point, war and all the kind of rest of it. So yeah, there's a you kind of see these kind of hallmarks if you go, okay, I know why this is tough. So I think from all of my travels, I think I've got quite good at being able to walk into a space and go, either, you're going to be doing super well here, or even with good occupancy, I can tell this is a tough gig, and maybe I won't be wrong 100% of the time, but I think that's one thing that I've kind of seen on my travels, and it's in every market. So it's not, it's not one market is worse than the other for that stuff. It's just, you can see examples of everywhere. But I think that's also a part of learning, right? Because again, if you think about the flex market, it's still relatively young. And if you think about your point, Kane, around, there's a common question of how do you value an asset? Like, what's the liquidity of an asset with flexing? Like, how do you value that? And then obviously there's the argument about the hotels. So, if hotels there's a way to, people have found a way to value that revenue. Similar model. The limiting factor is time, because flex has not got enough time to say that's, we can back that as a methodology, albeit it's the same methodology. So in my opinion, I don't know if you guys agree, it's like, it's not will it or won't it, or is there a way for it? So there's a way for it. It's just a time. So I think there's more and more people going, do you know what? Yeah, it's a timing thing. This is going to be a thing. We can see the route. The flex market just needs to have a bit more time to become more institutional and have a longer shelf life, I guess.
Yeah, I just wonder how long that is. It's interesting because yeah, because it'd be a long time. Like I do remember early in my like real estate career, in the early 2000s, it was tough to finance self-storage. Like because the problem is that people are like, oh, like, everybody could walk out of here in 30 days. You can literally have your entire place vacant in 30 days. But then lenders started to get comfortable with it when the market got tighter. And it's like, okay, I got to put out money. So if I can figure out how to value this asset, right, then I could put out that money. So it was kind of led by as much as the banks were standing in the way of those transactions. At one point, they became the catalyst to the valuations of getting those down to like low cap rates, like high valuations, because of the fact that they looked at it and said, well, wait a minute. Yes, but if you actually look at how long these people stay and the risk is distributed, all the things that's like is co-working, is everything, right?
Yeah.
The challenge is real estate moves at a glacial pace. right?
For sure.
And it seems so obvious to me. And when I go to London, I think it's interesting to see the evolution. You know, it's like stepping into a time machine and seeing like, okay, what would it look like if there was more adoption, right, in the markets that we're in? But if you look at it from the customer's perspective, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but like, you know, so many things, music, so many things have been disrupted, retail, but because the customer says what they want, and then ultimately someone comes in and says, I'm going to give you what you want, and they end up being the Amazons and the Apples and the right of the world.
For sure.
But like co-working and or a variation of it is that like no company says, I want to spend a bunch of our capital on building out a landlord space. That's illogical. That makes no sense. And given if they could have security of tenure without having obligation, they would also like that. You know, like there's so many things that are just,
Yeah.
you know, so I do think that in the fullness of time it'll happen, but I think it's
when,
yeah, I think
it's when, it's like when, and you know, what percentage of market do we have to hit for that to be true? I think the other thing that gives me great confidence is that the trends and the way that people are occupying space are not going backwards, because you only have to look at future generations to say, you know, would future generations subscribe to the way one used to work? The answer is no. Like, and you know, I can't see generations from now, but I can't see that reversing. So if you think about the way that people are kind of thinking about the way that they want to spend their time and spend their experience, it's in places where, you know, they want to be. I just think that's hard to walk back. On top of that, you have more and more companies who are uncertain about headcounts. Even the biggest companies in the world, right? They're kind of, you talk about AI, right? AI. I've seen, how many things have you seen where they go, this company X is reducing, you know, their staff by 50%, you know, and it's like I look at it as like kind of the real estate call all over again. It's like, we're going to walk away from 50% of our real estate. Oh no, we walked away from too much. We need a bit more. We need to deploy it elsewhere. It's like, I think the same thing's on the horizon with people. It's like, we cut back too much. We need to rehire. So I think there's just going to be this, people are going to be, trying to find this balance of like, the right size of business. And then on top of that, you've got the expansion. So you're a growing business. So, and there are more and more growing businesses. So I say all that rant, and I know we're all kind of in the preaching to the choir, but like the need for what we do as a sector is only going to increase. So I feel like the pressure. I'm sorry, I don't know if I feel like the pressure on the market.
I say
It's weird. And now
the Zoom blur thing that happened to me the other day too. I was like, why is this doing this?
Yeah. For those that are listening, they'll be like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah. Greg
No,
blurred.
big blurred. No one's seen me. But yeah, no, I think the market is going to continue to move in a way in which what we as an industry provide is going to be, more required than ever. And the other thing that you see is more and more landlords. So Ken, you mentioned owner operators in the UK. A lot of those are actually just landlords, or I think CBRE, or and I heard it at CBRE breakfast. I don't know if they coined the term, but they use the term brandlords, right? So Land have Story, and Landsec have Myo, and GPE have their own product. So a lot of those are landlords with real estate and saying to themselves, we want to get in this game and start to think about how we deliver space, kind of to compete with the current times. And I was at a kind of a roundtable discussion the other day, and I was listening to some developers, and they were like, "Oh no, now whenever we develop a new scheme, it's like, we think about, do we bring a flex provider in for X number of floors? We're going to do fitted for X number of floors, and we're going to have Cat A for X number of floors." So people are being dragged on that journey already to meet the market where it wants to be. So yeah, I think the headwinds are with us all. I don't think they're going to reverse. So I think it's a matter of time. Kane, to your point, I don't know when that time will be. We've been saying it's going to catch up for ages, and it hasn't. But I've got conviction. You have to.
That's right. Yep, the fullness of time. I'm also curious. I got one more question. I think you're gonna like this one. This one, Jamie. You're a previous broker. I always say like I'm a recovering broker because that's where I started. With you being at Instant, how do you think maybe you think differently than some of the other operators in how you work with the brokerage industry, having been in the brokerage industry?
Yeah, really. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, very interesting. It's a hot topic, the broker thing, actually, because I think it's often debated as like, is it the necessary evil and kind of all the rest of it. And I think that's kind of, there's always a debate around, how reliant should you be on brokers and all the kind of rest of it. I think it's twofold. Like having been a broker previously and in a couple of capacities, and then coming to the other side, you understand things that as a broker you don't understand about what it is to operate a business and all the kind of sensitivities around oh, can you just give me this, extra piece of commission, or can I have fees here and here? And so having been on the other side of that, being on both sides, you kind of understand like actually there's more sensitivities there. So I think that allows you to be more honest in your conversations when you're going through negotiations, or my sales team are going through negotiations with brokers. So I think that's one. I think the other thing is understanding motivations more. So not all brokerage shops are run the same. Your motivations are very different if you eat what you kill to if you're paid a decent salary and you are there to kind of maintain a relationship. Actually, fees don't make the difference. Certainty of delivery, communication, being really involved at every step makes a difference. So I think my experience has helped me to hopefully help our business and previous businesses understand how they need to engage with people within the industry, whether they're a broker or they call themselves an advisor or whatever, based on how their shops run, I guess you'd say. So you can kind of say, how do you need to engage with people? What's important to them? And for some, it's, they're fee hungry, and you just need to appeal to the fact that they're going to get paid well and quickly, and we're a trusted partner. And for others, it's we're going to take really great care of your client. We're going to grow the relationship together. We're going to keep you involved at every step, and giving you more insight into how we run our operation to make it clear that we're a good setup for the people that you're going to bring to us. So yeah, maybe just understanding how to work with different profiles has been a help from having been on the broker side. I also understand, inversely, the things that you say as a broker to drive urgency for the operator. And so it's like, all the things that, that you might have said to get deals done. And it's quite a salesy role. So yeah, you kind of, I'm sure you do the same, Ken. You're like, oh, I've heard this before. I remember maybe kind of using that same narrative before, and you can navigate it in a way that maybe you wouldn't if you hadn't been in that situation, I would say. I don't know if that's a good answer or not, but that's just my musing, I guess.
That's good. That's a great answer. Jamie, you had something.
Yeah, and brokers are so much more prevalent in the UK. And we won't spend time on this, but I'm curious, where you sort of got your marketing chops, because you've gone from, your career trajectory doesn't look like you have sort of formal training in marketing, but you're pretty deep into, the analytics and customer acquisition and conversion. So I have a kind of in the weeds question. I'm curious. I noticed you're on FlexSpace, which I'm a big fan of. I think I might have seen a case study, and curious like what that did for your portfolio in terms of transactions for on demand. And I'm curious, like on the flip side, so I can book on demand on your site, but I can't book a tour on your site. I have to do like an inquiry form. Why is that?
Yeah, so we do have. So I'll start backwards. So we do have book a tour links. I think we've just gone through. Maybe you've kind of looked at where we've not had them on, but we do have them, and they sync to our salesperson's diaries. So
there we go. I just found one. You know what? I feel like it's a little hidden.
maybe it's not hidden. It's interesting. We're going through a kind of, I'll share. We're going through a whole website overhaul. We're having a new website, so that's a process that we're underway with right now. So yeah, I think your comment's fair. I think there are a number of things that were just a little bit hidden, and so we've gone through a process of making sure that they're not. The flex space thing, great. I kind of was convinced very early. I had loads of other operators give me good feedback and say, people that I know and trust to say, oh no, this really makes a difference. So early days, but we've had material growth month to month in terms of our on demand by implementing the flex space AI kind of front end on our on demand stuff. So couldn't speak about them highly enough. They're a great partner to work with. They're really flexible in the way, they really want to work with you as a business partner, which is awesome. And the results have been great so far. So could not speak highly enough about them. And we're looking forward to continuing that partnership with them. From my side, I think, when you go into a leadership role as a CRO or CCO, you typically either were a head of marketing or you are a head of sales. That typically is the route. And one was your kind of place that you kind of cut your teeth, and the other is the thing that you learned. I think for me, across my last two companies, I was particularly in Dasana as well. I was kind of involved in marketing strategy as well. So more and more experience to leading those efforts. And then at WeWork, I had my own marketing team as part of my kind of team itself. So, and again, worked really, really closely with the team there. So just exposure over time. And then I think, where I've got to, and maybe this is just more broadly like a comment on like how I think about leadership or building a team or whatever, which is maybe interesting, maybe not, but I'll share anyway. I take my football kind of experience and I say, I'm going to give you an analogy, which is as a leader, my job is to be close enough to the functions in the same way a football manager is. So the football manager is, or the soccer manager is not the best player. You know, they never were the best player. They may have been a player with one, and they may have been a centre mid, but that manager doesn't need to be the best right back, centre back, you know, striker, whatever. But they need to be close enough to that subject matter to be able to understand who they need to bring in and how to manage that and spot when things are going well or not well. And so that's how I think about things. So, you know, bringing in good people who are obviously the experts in those areas. You know, the sales director that I've just brought in is a better sales director than I am. You know, that's his role. It's not, you know, that's you know, I'm happy for that. But being close enough to marketing, sales, and all the, you know, all the kind of compositional parts that I oversee to be able to understand, have I got the right person? Have we got the right strategy directionally? And can I spot when things are going wrong? So there's my kind of analogy and how I've thought about it. But I, yeah, got close enough to marketing in particular to be able to hopefully speak with some confidence on the matter, and you know, if nothing else, just support my director of marketing to perform in her capacity.
Love it. All right, Kane, we're close to the end. Do you get another one?
Oh, I got so many, but
I know.
we're getting to the end. So many questions. Every time I, you know, talk to another operator, there's always so many things that you learn. Like even just FlexSpace AI, right? Like they're like all the different things. You know, there's always little tidbits that you always get. But I find also when speaking with operators overseas, there's so much going on over there, and these conversations are always so fruitful.
Okay, well then I'll wrap up with my very short wrap-up question for the Flex Uncensored podcast, Greg, which is that if there is karaoke at the conference in Denver, what would be your karaoke song?
Oh, that is a great question. I think it would have to be Oasis Wonderwall, in keeping with, you know, the end of match song that we've been singing. And it's a great song, but I think, you know, hopefully we've won the World Cup, you know, and then I can sing it. Or if not, I can sing it with a few tears in my eyes. So yeah, Oasis Wonderwall.
Brilliant.
That's great. Well, hopefully there's going to be some karaoke when we get to Denver.
Totally.
Yeah. So.
Okay, well, thank you for missing today's World Cup game. We can go catch the end, and good luck tomorrow. And we look forward to seeing you in Denver.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you having me.
Great seeing you, Greg. Thanks for coming
Great
on.
seeing you. Thanks.
Great to see ya.